Destructive Typhoon Koinu nears southern Taiwan, with other developments around the world on today's Tropical Weather Bulletin. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for October 4th. So looking around the world, still very much the same picture that we had yesterday, but of course the severity of Koinu is getting closer to home for Taiwan, with landfall expected in the next 12 to 24 hours. Two tropical storms in the Western Hemisphere, Philippe and Lydia, and we'll take a look at those in a moment as well. We're code red though for the typhoon, but in the Atlantic, day 126 of hurricane season, Philippe moving away from the Lesser Antilles now. Warnings have been lifted, and a 20% chance that we've now marked off the coast of Africa. Fairly late in the season now for main development region activities, but could be another one on the way. Day 142 in the Eastern Pacific, Lydia hasn't strengthened very much so far. A 50% chance now to its east for a system that looks like it will develop next week near the coast of Mexico, and 20% entering the Central Pacific, where it doesn't look like it's going to get very far. In the Western Pacific, Koinu very close to landfall as we know, 30% area of interest now near Guam and a 40% behind it, much towards the eastern Micronesian islands. We'll take a look at those shortly as well, but those are both for the longer range, certainly day 5 onwards. And in the North Indian Ocean there's nothing active right now, but quite a lot of showers currently occurring in the Ganges River Delta region, Bangladesh and West Bengal. So that's what we've got around the world today. Let's take a close-up look at Koinu. It is only 27 kilometers now from Orchid Island, Taiwan, 72 from Green Island, 104 from Taitung, 167 from Kaohsiung City, and 330 from Taipei. There are typhoon warnings stretching almost the whole length of Taiwan now, and Signal 3 warnings in effect for the northern Batanes Islands. Signal 2 warnings extending further south through the Babayan Islands, and Signal 1 warnings for the northern tip of Luzon. There are also gale advisories for the southernmost Ryukyu Islands, Miyakojima, and the Yayama Islands. Here's Philippe right now. All warnings have been lifted. We now have it 162 kilometers from San Juan, Puerto Rico, 591 from Coburn Town, 1374 from Bermuda, which is probably going to be its next stop, 2413 from Nantucket, and 2763 from Halifax, Nova Scotia, where it could also end up later on in the weekend or perhaps early next week. Interestingly, with both Philippe and Lydia, the National Hurricane Center are no longer forecasting hurricanes out of either of them, at least in the next 5 days. Let's take a look at the latest satellite imagery then. This is Koinu, and as you can see, it's getting very, very close now to reaching its landfall point or points. It looks like it could make a direct pass over Orchid Island there, that small island on that left side, which looks like it's going to be entering the eye shortly. Now, interestingly, it's starting to look a little bit better again on satellite imagery after regressing slightly, but the cloud tops have built back a little bit, the eye's gotten a little bit deeper, so it certainly is a borderline Category 4 still at this point. We're giving it 125 miles per hour Category 3, and there's the radar looking exceptional on the southern and western side. Could be very destructive with very heavy rainfall as well, which will lead to flash flooding. Now here is Philippe, still not looking that great, but it is a sight better than it was yesterday. It's starting to get itself back on track, still got huge amounts of wind shear pounding at it from the west there, but looks like some decent amounts of convection getting closer to the center once again. Puerto Rico getting quite a bit of that too. You can see some of the radar here showing some significant rainfall, especially in eastern Puerto Rico, but the Virgin Islands particularly getting the raw deal of it right now. And here's Lydia, also partially maybe not partially exposed anymore, but close to it, being heavily wind sheared from the eastern side, and that is also blowing up large amounts of convection on the west, so it's holding firm so far, around 45, maybe 50 miles per hour, and slowly moving off towards the northwest right now. Sea surface temperatures look like this. For Lydia in the eastern Pacific, it's looking good, around 30 degrees Celsius. Those will start to drop a little bit as it continues northwesterly. By the time we get to the weekend, it will drop quite a bit more. In the Atlantic, still looking very good for Philippe, at least in the short term, until Bermuda. Temperatures are above 26 degrees Celsius. Where it is right now, it's around 28-29. The Caribbean, piping hot, and the western Gulf of Mexico, also a big hot spot there, and the main development region in those lower latitudes where that next system could form, still looking okay. Western Pacific also looking good near Taiwan, the coast there where Koinu is 29 degrees Celsius. Over the Philippine Sea to the southeast, still looking very warm, over 30 degrees in a few spots, and in the South China Sea and near the eastern Micronesian islands, also very warm. North Indian Ocean, Bay of Bengal looking good near the coast of India and Bangladesh, 29 degrees Celsius in a few spots. The Arabian Sea also starting to get up to temperature as well. Southwest Indian Ocean starting to come back too. Of course, it's starting to enter the spring period there, and in the Australian region a similar story with those warm temperatures flooding the Gulf of Carpentaria now over 26 degrees. Also happening in a big way near Fiji and Vanuatu in the South Pacific. Those temperatures are on the return. Looking at sea surface temperature anomalies, this is compared to average. You can see the Western Pacific is generally above average except for a few spots. In the Eastern Pacific it's still half and half, but the most important half is in the east where those really warm temperatures are compared to average. Western Gulf on fire, the Caribbean Sea very warm, and the main development region fairly warm as well. The Western Atlantic up towards Bermuda and beyond is around average now, so Philippe won't get any preferential treatment. Looking at the oceanic heat content, still a huge amount of energy over there in large parts of the Caribbean Sea and up towards the Bahamas, a little area too in the Gulf, and off the coast of Mexico also a decent area of energy there where Lydia is for a little while. Western Pacific also holding on to a decent corridor of energy through the Philippine Sea and around Guam and beyond to the east. So let's take a look at the GFS computer model then for the next 5 days. This is what it sees out of Philippe, moving gradually northwards, and then a complex situation there where another system spawns off to its west, and Philippe is sort of competing with that, and it also might change its track and intensity, whether it will be driven further east or whether it will still cruise further north and directly affect Bermuda, but they should certainly watch out for tropical storm conditions possible later this week, and then on towards Canada there, Atlantic Canada, as an extratropical cyclone but could be powerful hurricane strength. This is Lydia moving off towards the west there, becoming a hurricane according to GFS, but the National Hurricane Center isn't so sure, maybe even category 2 on that forecast before starting to round towards the north there late on in that 5-day period. Also, towards the end of that, you can see that 50% chance on the right hand side of the image starting to appear near the end of that loop. Now here's the Western Pacific, Koinu making a landfall very shortly and then moving into the South China Sea, and it could affect the southern coast of China and Hong Kong with tropical storm force winds before being swept away towards the southwest. Also another system forming towards the end of that loop there that you just saw in the eastern area, but a close-up again of Koinu and its movement there. GFS now more on board with what the JTWC forecast was saying, a weak low pressure approaching the Philippines later in the week and that new system heading towards Guam. Now let's take a look at the rainfall expectations for Taiwan. Of course they're still very elevated and they haven't changed very much, so it's pretty much locked in at this point that most parts of the mountains of eastern Taiwan will receive between 500 and 750 millimeters of rain, with possibly higher amounts in isolated locations, and that could cause, especially with the rate of rainfall, flooding and landslides, which could be very dangerous. Maximums on the model there, 26 inches over land, and that is a shade above, I'm trying to figure that one out actually, 500, 600 millimeters, something like that, quite a bit. And 29 inches, nearly 750 millimeters just south of Taiwan, thankfully not over any land areas. Philippines also will be getting around 5 inches of rain there, 125 millimeters, and Taipei getting up towards 10 inches, 250 millimeters. Looking at the medium range then, day 5 to 10, you can see this Little surprise possibly in the eastern Atlantic there, a fairly short-lived hurricane that occurs and moves on towards the west-northwest. You won't see this in the long range because it dies off pretty quickly after that last frame, but there it is, an interesting system, and quite late in the year to see something happening so far east, but certainly a possibility. Eastern Pacific, we have of course Lydia starting to turn, but turn it definitely does, and in conjunction with another storm, a two-pronged attack for the coast of Mexico there, with two substantial hurricane landfalls that actually materialize if that medium range is to be believed. First of all, look at that second system that forms very quickly off the coast of Mexico and strengthens really quickly, possibly a Category 3 landfall there, and then Lydia coming in north of Puerto Vallarta as a Category 2 probably, but that's still very speculative right now, and I'll wait for more information on that. And there's this very enormous system in the Western Pacific that really starts to get going. That was that 40% that we marked in the east that starts up and goes towards the Northern Mariana Islands and beyond, northwards there. And then we've got that other system that moves through the Philippines, drops a lot of rainfall, and then actually finally develops properly into a tropical storm as it nears the coast of Vietnam. Looks like it stalls there as well, so very tricky forecasts there for the Western Pacific. Scan the barcode and that will take you to the Force 13 merch store, where we have all of our usual items as well as our full season and individual storm animations, and are still waiting for Hone t-shirts, and boy aren't we. In the silly range then, a lot of that energy from the Western Pacific storms develops into a non-tropical system that affects the Gulf of Mexico there that you saw at the beginning, but later on in that run we get another tropical storm forming and into a hurricane there in the Eastern Pacific, another one that starts to move westwards, and that's very late on in that run, so I'm not sure whether that will happen yet, but interesting to see that those two initial hurricanes could go on to have implications for the Gulf Coast with strong winds from a probably non-tropical low later on. Western Pacific, watching that big typhoon moving on towards the north, and that other one near Vietnam, and the Vietnam one gets close to Hainan into the Gulf of Tonkin, a very slow movement there, and finally a landfall further north, and then maybe a third system appearing later on in the open ocean there, getting further north. But that second system that was out at sea becoming a very powerful one, swiping past Japan, not really a big implication there, but that of course could change. This is long range and could have significant deviations down the road. You can talk about all of this and more in our Discord server, discord.gg/force13 for tropical weather and general weather chat around the world. And plenty of topics in the tropics today. Well, on this day in 2005, can you imagine that? How long ago it is now? 18 years, would you believe? Stan was the main feature, making a Category 1 landfall in Mexico, but despite its low strength comparatively, it did cause serious implications with massive flooding losses, a very destructive and deadly storm. We also had subtropical storm 21L in the eastern Atlantic moving through the Azores on this day in 2005. Let's go back to this year then, and we are code red for Koinu. The next name in the Atlantic though is Sean. In the Eastern Pacific it's Max, and in the Central Pacific it is still Hone. 63 storms so far this year around the world. The average is 92. I get the feeling we've been a lot more quality over quantity. The next name in the Western Pacific, in a very lone scoring season so far, but a lot of strong storms, is Balavan. In the North Indian Ocean, we are still looking out for the next name, Tej, which we almost got last week. In the Australian region, the next season starting up, Jasper, Southwest Indian Ocean, Alvaro is next up, and in the South Pacific, we'll be looking out for Lola. That's all from today's Tropical Weather Bulletin. We'll be back again tomorrow.